The year was 1981. Journey's Don't Stop Believing and Rick Springfield's Jesse's Girl would play over and over on radio stations. In the movie theaters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Evil Dead, and heavy metal would take the U.S. by storm. Nestled into the forests of Northern California, Keddie was a small town where people came to enjoy its beautiful and serene views away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Its highest population was in 2012 with 169 people, and its lowest in 2018 at just 41. In 1981, Keddie became a focal point in the media when a triple homicide and kidnapping took place, leaving the locals stunned and wondering who could have done such a brutal thing in their all but peaceful neck of the woods. Years beforehand, Glenna Sue Sharp would end up taking her 5 kids, leaving her abusive husband in Connecticut, and later settled down closer to her brother in Northern California, ultimately finding a place called Cabin 28 in Keddie. On the night of April 11th, Sue and her 5 kids, Tina, 12, Sheila, 14, John, 15, and Rick and Greg, who were 10 and 5 respectively, were all together in the cabin. John's friend, Dana Hall Wingate, as well as Justin Smart, who was a neighborhood friend of both Rick and Greg, were also in the cabin that night.
Sheila, Sue's 14-year-old daughter, had left the cabin after deciding to sleep over at her friend's cabin, which neighbored her families, who were called the Seabolts. When she returned home the next morning around 7:45 a.m., she was met with a bad smell as she opened her front door. Sheila would tragically stumble upon the grisly murder scene of her mother Sue, brother John, and John's friend Dana, who were all lying dead on the floor in the cabin's living room. After running out of the house in a panic, she went back to the Seabolts' house and alerted them of what she had just discovered. After hearing the news, the father of Sheila's friend, James Seabolt, then went to Cabin 28 and was able to get Rick, Greg, and Justin Smart out of the house via a window in the boys' bedroom, just 10 feet away from where the murders took place. None of the boys were hurt, and it was initially reported that they had slept through the attack, unaware of what happened the previous night. Tina, Sue's 12-year-old daughter, was nowhere to be found at the scene and was considered a missing person until eventually her remains were found 3 years later, almost to the day, 100 miles away. The leading theory of events seems to suggest that Sue was attacked first, and the boys, John and Dana, in an act to defend Sue, fought the attacker or attackers, losing their own lives in the process. It isn't known if the boys came home to see Sue being attacked and intervened, or were already at the residence when the attacker or attackers first arrived and heard a commotion. It's thought that Sue Sharp was the final victim of the attack and witnessed the brutal killing of her son John and his friend Dana. As far as Tina goes, it isn't known if she left the house alive that night or not.
When police arrived and entered the house, they found all 3 bodies in the living room of Cabin 28 bound with medical tape and electrical cords. The phone had been taken off the hook and the lines were cut from the outlet. All of the drapes had been closed and lights shut off, prohibiting anyone from seeing the horror the cabin contained. A hammer and 2 knives were collected at the scene, one of which was noted to have been a steak knife that was bent at a 30-degree angle. The murders themselves were noted to have been particularly brutal, and the amount of blood spatter and stained carpets would seem to confirm that fact. It also seems that the killer spent a good amount of time in Cabin 28, suggesting that this wasn't some kind of spontaneous event, but more of a strategic and agonizing torture that they forced their victims to endure. On the walls were clearly visible stab marks, and a single bloody footprint was found in the yard. Police surmised that there was no forced entry, and that it seemed that the killer or killers walked in through the cabin through its front door. At the back of the house, police collected fingerprints from a handrail, but they were never identified. Sue Sharp was found near the couch. On one side of her head, there was an imprint matching the butt of a pellet rifle. John's throat had been cut, and he had blunt force trauma to his head. This was theorized to have been caused by a hammer. Dana Wingate also showed signs of the same blunt force trauma to his head, as did the rest of the victims. However, it was finally determined his cause of death was asphyxiation later in his autopsy. The police asked Sheila and the Seabolts if they had heard any sort of commotion during the night, to which they all responded that they had heard nothing. And this is kind of significant because the neighboring cabin that Sheila was at, the Seabolts' house, was literally 3 feet away from cabin 28. A neighboring couple reported hearing faint, muffled screams around 1:30 in the morning, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from, so they ultimately decided to go back to sleep. And this is crazy to me, but you know what? I'm sure you hear a lot of creepy things in the forest in the middle of the night, and you must get pretty good at blocking that out or rationalizing it as anything other than a triple murder, homicide, kidnapping.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, no one goes to that. And honestly, they probably thought it was a Wendigo.
Rational.
I would. All in all, the crime scene was not handled properly by the authorities, and they would receive heavy criticism due to their multiple blunders. Firstly, the crime scene was not immediately secured by authorities. James Seabolt, the neighbor at cabin 27, who got Rick, Greg, and Justin out of the house, admitted that he had gone up back the stairs of cabin 28 in an attempt to see if anyone was still alive in the house, which could have potentially contaminated evidence. Even if that was the case, police reportedly never seized any evidence from the bottom room of cabin 28 at all. This leaves us to wonder what insights to the unsightly murders could have been gleaned. Don Davis, Sue's brother, said that there was confusion about who the victims were inside cabin 28. Initially, the sheriff's office thought the victims were Sue Sharp and 2 of her children. Later that day, Don said they brought out the bodies for him to identify. He said he recognized his sister and nephew John and someone he didn't know, who was Dana. From the beginning of the investigation, it took police quite a while to even realize that 12-year-old Tina was missing. When they had first arrived at the scene, Justin Smart tried to tell police that the young girl was missing, but they either were not listening or were distracted by the crime scene in front of them. It wasn't until hours later that they began to realize, wasting what could have been crucial time in the process, that the 12-year-old girl was gone and unaccounted for. Tina's disappearance was initially investigated by the FBI as a possible abduction, though it was reported on April 29, 1981, that FBI backed off the search as the Department of Justice was doing an adequate job and made the FBI's presence unnecessary. Those are quotes. A grid-pattern search of the area covered a 5-mile radius around the house was conducted with police canines, but unfortunately the search would amount to nothing. Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg in 2016 is quoted to have said in regards to the initial investigation, quote, "You could take someone just coming out of the academy and they would have done a better job." 3 years later, a bottle collector by the name of Ronald Pedrini notified police when walking near the hamlet of Feather Falls, around 100 miles away from Keddie, and he came across what appeared to be a human cranium. After thoroughly searching the area, investigators would find a mandible and other bones. The remains were identified as Tina Sharp. After an evaluation of the bones were done, doctors claimed she had been dead for at least a year before being found. Also found with her remains were a blue nylon jacket, a pair of denim jeans missing the back pocket, a blanket, and a used reel of surgical tape. In the days following the discovery of Tina's remains, police received an anonymous tip that the remains had belonged to Tina before the pathologist had even made his formal declaration. This call was recorded but never used as evidence or looked into. The recording was found laying in a cardboard box amassed with other evidence for the case at some point after 2013. It's hardly a smoking gun, but things like this should have been looked into. The fact that they weren't is really such a shame.
Justin Smart, who was one of the surviving boys, had conflicting stories about what had happened that night. When police arrived, he originally told them that he was asleep during the murders, only to change his story, saying that he was indeed awake and actually witnessed the murders themselves, and even described the event in some great detail. Shortly after the murders, Justin claimed while under hypnosis that he had witnessed the killings, and described seeing 2 attackers in cabin 28 that night. He proceeded by saying he saw 2 men, both wearing glasses and denim jeans and jean jackets, a Canadian tuxedo, if you will. The first man had short hair with a mustache, while the second man had long hair but was clean shaven. Justin claimed that during the confrontation with Sue and the attackers, John and Dana arrived to her aid and a fight broke out. During this fight, Justin claimed that Tina walked out to see what was going on and was removed from the house by one of the men, never to be seen again. There was a couple minor inconsistencies with his story, however. One being that he watched one of the men as they took Tina through the back of the house. However, from where Justin claimed to have been watching everything from, Rick and Greg's bedroom, it would have been impossible for him to see this actually happen unless he had some sort of x-ray vision. I mean, there were walls clearly blocking the back of the house, so it's kind of weird there. I really don't have an opinion if hypnosis is really an adequate way to retrieve repressed or forgotten memories, but it does seem to be widely recognized as a pseudoscience by a lot of people that are smarter than us. That's not to say hypnosis doesn't work, but specifically talking about retrieving memories, it seems that that's not really the case.
And if you believe in that, don't hate us.
For sure. For all we know, he could have just witnessed the murders and been scared to talk about such a traumatic event in any detail at first, especially with him being so young, but then later began to process the things he saw over time. Who knows? It's hard to tell.
Stefan, it's not especially. It's
Especially. Gotcha. And I would be remiss if we didn't at least mention the original composite sketch of the two suspects based on the testimony that was given by Justin Smart, which was masterfully done by the artist Harlan Embry. It was never explained why, with access to the Defense of Justice and the FBI's top forensic artists, why law enforcement chose to use an amateur who sometimes volunteered to help Reno PD, but his sketch appeared to be some sort of like Mike Judge Beavis and Butthead version of Geddy Lee from Rush, and the other drawing looks like it could be Ned Flanders. That being said, as bad as that composite sketch was, there are a couple of leading theories on who the killers actually were.
So Martin Smart, stepfather of Justin Smart, was a Vietnam veteran who was a very troubled individual known to physically and emotionally abuse his wife and children. When questioned by the police about the night of the murders, Martin claimed to have been with a friend and roommate, Bo, saying that the two went out for a couple drinks at a local bar along with Martin's wife, Marilyn Smart. That night, in the bar, there was a verbal altercation between Martin and the owner of the bar, who changed the music from country to rock. Martin didn't like that at all, so much so that he got up and left the bar in a huff. The two men were described to be wearing nice suits, which is unusual for a small railroad community. After leaving the bar and returning to his cabin, Martin called the bar and complained to a bartender about why he left, but ultimately ended up smoothing things over so that he and Bo could have a couple more drinks until the last call at 2 a.m. Marilyn Smart would stay behind in a bed as the two men left to go back to the bar. Martin claimed the men were just at the bar having fun and enjoying some drinks, but it begs the question, was Martin trying to stand out that night? Picking fights and becoming frustrated over something as trivial as music? Were the two wearing fancy suits for the heck of it, or were they making sure that people saw him at the bar that night, solidifying an alibi? Martin would meet his friend Bo when the two struck up a conversation at a hospital where Martin was admitted due to PTSD from serving in Vietnam. The friendship became so intense that Martin even allowed Bo to stay at his own cabin, located near the Sharps' cabin. Marilyn couldn't object to the strange man staying with their family as she was too worried about being beaten by Martin. Dare she question him or make a complaint? Bo was a known felon with robbery and home invasion convictions and associations with the Chicago outfit mafia. It's speculated the two were involved in some sort of drug business that Bo would end up talking Martin into. And remember, this is the 80s, and the crack epidemic was in full swing, and drugs were rampant. So who knows what these two were up to, but being that the crime scene was so gruesome, this could possibly explain why the murders were so grisly.
Pretty much from the start of the investigation, Martin and Bo were considered main suspects, but never ended up being arrested or even charged with any crimes. Initially, when police questioned Martin about the murders, he told police that a hammer was taken from his residence. Martin was even polygraphed by police and asked if he had anything to do with the murders, and apparently passed with flying colors. Marilyn Smart also claimed that she had found Tina's bloodstained jacket in their basement. She reportedly handed over the evidence to police, although it was never confirmed by authorities that this ever happened. What we do know is that Marilyn Smart and Sue Sharp were friends who regularly talked and would vent about their problems with one another. As a woman who had left an abusive relationship herself in the past, Sue was there for her friend who would confide in her. And soon, the two would devise a plan about how Marilyn could leave the house and divorce Martin Smart. When Martin began to catch on to what was happening and realized the two were having these conversations, he became allegedly, quote, ballistic. Marilyn also stated in a 2008 documentary on the Keddie murders that Martin Smart always hated Sue's son, John Sharp. It's worth noting here that the initial investigators that handled this case were the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, and the sheriff at that time was Sylvester Thomas. Coincidentally, Sheriff Thomas lived in Cabin 28 right before the Sharps would take their residency there. Sheriff Thomas recalled one time where he was asked if he had known Martin Smart. Thomas responded that him and Marty were, quote, great pals, and Martin spent hours hanging out with him while he was on patrol. Thomas said that Martin and Marilyn Smart allegedly came to him once for some marriage counseling, but he recalled pointing out that he was hardly the person to give any advice, as he had been recently divorced. Smart said Thomas allegedly allowed him to live in Cabin 28 for some time when Smart was having some marital problems with Marilyn previously. Sheriff Thomas would also be the one to perform Justin Smart's first hypnosis session after having just practiced doing it 2 times before. That's crazy. Weird enough, he was also the one to administer Martin Smart's polygraph test that he, quote, passed with flying colors. I don't really know what to make of this. They could just be coincidences, but it certainly could indicate that there's some possible police cover-up going on here if him and Martin were, quote, that great pals, I could definitely see maybe something like that happening.
And here's the thing. Regardless of what you think about, hypnosis, I don't think he was the person to administer hypnosis. You want someone who actually knows what they're doing and not someone who had read a book about it or something like that.
Yeah, I think the second session they got someone else, but for this first session, and it's so weird. They're also coming to him for like marital advice. Who goes to a sheriff's office when you're arguing with your wife? Even in 1980, that seems a little weird. I don't know. I've never lived in Keddie, but maybe that's what they do out there.
So Martin left the town of Keddie following the murders and traveled to Reno, where he wrote a letter to his then wife saying, quote, I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want? End quote. A counselor whom Martin regularly visited would also allege in 2008 that he had admitted to the murders of Sue and Tina, but claimed, quote, I didn't have anything to do with the boys. He allegedly told the counselor that Tina was killed to prevent her from identifying him, as she had witnessed the whole thing. Martin Smart died of cancer in Portland, Oregon in June 2000, while Bo died in Chicago in 1988. How they were never arrested for this is insane. There were several other potential suspects ruled out that could have possibly committed the murders, including serial killers Robert Joseph Silvera Jr., aka the Boxcar Killer, Henry Lee Lucas, and Otis Toole. Another interesting possible lead came from Tina Sharp herself. Months before the murders, Tina was interviewed by the Plumas County Sheriff's Office when she reported she was molested by a man in the nearby neighboring Quincy, California. It is possible that this man could have been the killer, and that was the reason why she was taken from the house. That's all just sort of speculation, though. After years of no solid evidence, at least that the police were aware of, this case would go cold.
Cabin 28 was torn down in 2004, and the Keddie Resort resembles more of a ghost town than the quaint refuge it once was. On March 24th, 2016, a hammer matching the description of the hammer Martin claimed to have lost was discovered in a local pond and was taken in as evidence by Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood, who was 16 years old at the time of the murders and knew the Sharp family personally, stated, quote, "The location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would have not been accidentally misplaced," end quote. And it's crazy to think that even after Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004, 12 years later in 2016, police are still finding evidence of these murders in the immediate area. Special investigator Mike Gamberg also stated at that time that 6 potential suspects were being examined for the murders. In April of 2018, Gamberg stated that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. New evidence is always seeming to come out, shedding new light on what happened that night in 1981 at Cabin 28, whether it's overlooked evidence or new clues being discovered. And although this case is still unsolved to this day, the answer to who committed these crimes seems like it could potentially be answered with more accuracy in the upcoming future.
Or maybe not. It might be, lost forever. It sounds like a horror movie. I mean, honestly, not to make light of it, but it really does. This whole thing is just sounds like a horror movie waiting to happen.
Happy Halloween, everyone.
Yep. Yeah, happy Halloween. Thanks for listening. And if you like us, subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Peace.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is an episode from our past. My name's Kenny, and I'm here with my good friend Stefan. How are you, Stefan?
I'm doing pretty good, dude. Good to be here.
Yeah, I just got back from a 2-week vacation. Basically went to my aunt, Bertha's house, and we had a bunch of good times, had some drinks, just chilled out. What did you do this last week?
Well, I did some laundry. I washed my dog. It's pretty sick.
How's Maddie?
Pretty good,
Everyone's just like, get the fuck on with it.